Shalom everyone. In this lesson, we will examine and compare the English and Hebrew alphabets.
It is important to note that when we mention the English alphabet, we are actually referring to the Latin alphabet, which Western peoples have inherited.
We can already notice that the Hebrew alphabet has 22 letters while the English one has 26.
It is reported that in ancient times, numbers and letters were inseparable. Is that still the case?
Absolutely. Letters are still used to write numerical values. Did you know that the word alphabet comes from the first two Hebrew letters, Aleph and Bet?
Okay, let's begin. The first two letters, Aleph and Bet, correspond to the letters A and B, respectively, so there's nothing unusual here.
However, with the letter Gimmel, it gets a bit more complicated. Although it corresponds to the letter G, its position is where we have our C.
One might think it's a random substitution, but upon closer examination, it's clear there might be a significant reason for this.
Let's understand that in Hebrew, each letter has a literal meaning. Gimmel, for example, means camel. If we consider that the word chameau in French and camel in English both start with a C, we begin to perceive the beginning of an explanation.
Fascinating. And digging a bit deeper, we find that the word camel starts with letters G, or C, or even K in various languages around the world.
Note that in Arabic, it's called Jamal, because in many regions, the Gimmel is pronounced like a J.
It's intriguing to see how a single word can illustrate linguistic divergences and differences between alphabets even though they share a common origin.
Yes, it is. Okay, let's continue. The next letter, dallet, corresponds to D, so both the letter and its position remain unchanged.
However, with the letter He, it's a bit peculiar because it is in the position of our E. This may seem strange since He is actually an H. Moreover, it often serves as a vowel. Very often, it is used as Ha or He. That's why it can be associated with the letter E sound without much difficulty.
It's important to understand that the West introduced vowels into the alphabet, so they had to fit them all in without disrupting the original order too much.
But we will see later that a workaround was found to address this slight shift.
Now with the letter Vav we have another dilemma because it is in the position of the letter F.
Yet, in Hebrew, it is akin to a letter V, am I right?
Yes, that's correct. The Vav is very versatile. It can be pronounced as V, as in the word avir, or O, as in the word toda, or even U, as in the word shavua, depending on the context. Note that, in reality, the consonant V arrived late in the history of the Hebrew alphabet. In ancient times, it was more of a W sound, as is still the case in Arabic. It was probably pronounced wow. However, it is difficult to say precisely how the letters were pronounced in ancient times, as we have no audio recordings from those times.
Very funny. Regarding the relationship between the letters V and F, it's simply a matter of regional pronunciation.
Yes, in fact, in some countries, there are even lessons for children to learn to distinguish these two sounds.
Right, these two sounds originally have a significant connection.
The next letter is Zion. Here again, we might wonder why there's a shift since we have the letter G in its place. This is likely another instance of pronunciation shifting from one language to another. The sounds ZE and JE probably got mixed up.
However, Zayin now correspond to the letter Z.
The next one is the letter Het.
Yes, this is where the trick with the letter He, the little sleight of hand I mentioned earlier, comes into play.
Can you please explain this sleight of hand to us?
Okay, I'll do it. Well, remember, we didn't place the He where it should have been, because it was replaced by the vowel E.
Yes, and the thing is that now, it happens that the letter Het looks a lot like the letter He in its written form. But that's not all.
Oh yeah, I think I see what you're going to say. You mean it's pronounced a bit like an H but more strongly accented, am I right?
Exactly. You need to scrape the back of your throat a bit to pronounce it well. And on the other hand, since this specific sound of the letter Het was not used by Latin languages, it could be omitted. It was the perfect opportunity to replace it with the missing letter He.
That's surely why we chose to put the H in its place. In fact, it is important to understand that the letter He of the Hebrew alphabet corresponds to the letter H of our alphabet in reality.
Yes, great. So just like that, the trick was done. A real linguistic balancing act between the two letters.
Here we have another complication because the tet corresponds to our T in English. But in the Hebrew alphabet, there are two letters for T, the tet and the tav. Finally, the Latin alphabet chose to retain only the tav.
So, that means that the letter tet left an empty place in our alphabet, isn't it?
Exactly, and it was just perfect because we needed to integrate the letter J. Indeed, the letter J has a strong connection with the letter I.
Of course, because the letter I actually corresponds to the letter Yod in Hebrew.
Historically, the letters I and J often got mixed up. Take the example of Jesus, who was pronounced Jesus or in Hebrew Yeshua. Consequently, the Latin alphabet had to adapt.
Exactly. To integrate the J, the Latin alphabet moved the I to replace the vacant tet, and placed the J in the position of Yud.
The letters Kaf, Lamed, Mem, and Nun all correspond to their respective letters K, L, M, N.
The next letter, I have a little trouble pronouncing it. Can you please tell me how to pronounce it, Shira?
Yes, of course, it is pronounced Samekh.
Thank you. In fact, this is a particularly interesting letter. Do you know where it is in our alphabet?
Isn't it where we have the letter O?
Precisely. What's intriguing is the change in pronunciation. They placed an S instead of an O.
Yes, actually, at first glance, one might think they have nothing in common.
That's quite surprising indeed. How do you explain that?
Well, if you look closely at this letter, you will notice that it looks just like a sun. It is written by forming a circle, just like our O.
Okay, but how is the connection made?
To understand this, we need to go back to the much older Phoenician alphabet. We see that the same letter was not called Samekh, but Ayin. There was actually an inversion between the two letters when transitioning from the Phoenician to the Hebrew alphabet.
But what's interesting to note here is the meaning of the letter Ayin in Semitic languages. Yes, can you imagine that the letter Ayin actually means I in Semitic languages?
Do you mean that this round shape evokes an eye?
Yes, exactly.
Oh yeah? That makes things clearer indeed.
But that's not all because it makes sense in French since the word I starts with an O.
All right then, and how does this relate to Ayin in the Hebrew alphabet?
As a matter of fact, since the two letters have changed position relative to their order in the Phoenician alphabet, the Ayin is no longer written in a circular form. Today it has been replaced by an inverted Greek Y.
And precisely, once again, in French, how do you say eyes? I mean the eyes in plural.
Well, I'm not going to pronounce it, but it starts with a Y, like this. However, the letter is positioned where we have our P, but it should be noted that from Pei onwards, the letters are all shifted until the end.
The next letter is Tsadi. Does it have an equivalent in English?
No, there isn't a direct equivalent for the letter Tsada in English. However, its shape may remind us of the letter X in our alphabet, but this remains a supposition. Nevertheless, we can imagine there was a shift from Tse to Kse. The last letters, Kaf, Resh, Shin, Tav, all correspond to their respective letters, Q, R, S, T.
Yes, and this is an opportunity to remember again that the letter Tav is the second T in the Hebrew alphabet. The first one is the letter Tet, do you remember?
It's important to know that even though there are two T's, it doesn't mean that one of the two letters is useless.
Indeed, while modern Hebrew may use them interchangeably, each of the two letters used to have its own sound, which is still the case in Arabic.
This shows us how Hebrew has adapted its pronunciation to make it easier for newcomers.
Exactly. Hebrew has somewhat modernized, losing some consonants that were difficult for Westerners to pronounce.